Sanjay Bhattacharya, our CEO Shri Abbagani Ramu, distinguished panel headed by, moderated by Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, colleagues from MEA and friends. We have, oh great. So I was just going to say that people from the European Commission might join us a little while later, but I see them already here. So at the outset, let me make standard housekeeping announcements for the discussion. Except those who are not the speakers, may I request all of you to kindly turn off your audios, please, so that we have a seamless discussion. Please use the group chat option to type in your comments or feedbacks or any suggestions regarding whatever the speaker is talking about or your questions. Alternately, you may also raise them during the discussion session, which we have started later. And the moderator would be going around taking all your questions when we begin the discussion. So with those few remarks, I would like to invite Secretary CPV and OIA and our chairman, Shri Sanjay Bhattacharya, to make his initial remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Surabhi. And good afternoon to all our friends over here. I find we have a very, very distinguished panel. Professor Gulshan Sachdev, Alexandra Carvalho from the European Commission, Professor Jonathan Ports from King's, Gagan Sabharwal from Global Trade Development, NASCOM, and Sonu Iyer. Thank you so much for joining in this, because what we were trying to do through ICM was to develop a set of conversations where we share the best practices and look at what the experiences have been so that we can go forward in a much more constructive manner. And given the exigencies of COVID, which has posed new challenges, but we all believe that this will also pass, and migration, which is, for us, I see it as a very natural flow, which adds value and adds quality. And basically, it makes the world a much more beautiful place. So I think migration will continue, but it will probably assume some new forms. Currently, in the ministry, we've taken advantage of the lull induced by COVID to do a lot of introspection and to have a lot of engagement and conversations with the various stakeholders. And I'm very happy that ICM has been the lead on all of these. The two things that I think stood out most is that we have to work much harder in the days ahead. But there are two positive things that come out of these discussions. The first is that skills are becoming a very important element in the new form of migration. And this means that there are opportunities for upskilling, reskilling, acquiring new skills, skill matching, and to look at the markets where this is going to be much more attractive. The second is that although traditionally we have had most of our workers and many of our professionals going to certain destination countries, we now realize that there are new situations, including the fourth industrial revolution, which the impact of high technology, which bring about new migration streams. And I think this is the very, very fascinating aspect. And this is something in which we are working and seek to work much more collaboratively with the industry in particular, because they're the ones who receive the demands from these new destination countries. We see, for instance, increased demand in some of the East Asian countries. For instance, we also see there are certain other regions over there where there is increasing demand for high technology, high skill migration. Of course, the traditional markets for professionals and high skills have been the US, North America, and of course, the European Union. And I think today's discussion to focus on the European Union is very, very apt. So thank you for joining in over here. We found that also that the nature of demand in the European economy is changing. And while there are some areas where we've had in the past large number of migrants go, for instance, Italy, which is a very large demander, And then we found that there was Netherlands, Spain, Belgium have been countries that have received large number of Indians over the last several years. We find that high technology or highly skilled people from India are actually demanded, are finding resonance in a certain other group of set of countries. Primarily, we found that Germany, France, and the Netherlands have had increasing demands for high-tech Indian movements. Some of this probably is because of the nature of the economy. And I think also there is a second factor which has facilitated this process. And I think that's the blue cards that are being issued. And we've seen that if you look at blue cards, the top three countries which have provided blue cards to Indian professionals, highly skilled people, are in Germany, Luxembourg, and France. Of course, there are certain other developments that we see which have come about because of COVID. We've seen a certain exodus, which we feel probably is just COVID induced and therefore maybe temporary in nature. We've had over 10,000 people who've come back from the UK. And of course, there is the Brexit, which is unveiling and will probably come out in its full form by the beginning of next year. But we'll see how that goes. And we've also had roughly about 8,000 professionals who've come back from the rest of EU, particularly from Italy, France, and Germany, and the Netherlands. So there has been a large number of people who've come back. We would like to work with the European Union, and I think you would recall that very recently when we had the India-EU summit, which was held on the 15th of July, and then they had at that session commented on the progress that had been made under the high-level dialogue on migration and mobility, and our constant efforts to streamline the movement in both directions and to bring in the applicable migration and mobility rules. And I think this is something that I will look forward to working much more closely together with our colleagues in the European institutions, because we would like to work on the basis of a framework. And within that framework, we also have a large number of bilateral arrangements that we've had. So we have today about 12 social security agreements with several European countries. We also have migration and mobility agreement, and we are working on the labor mobility partnership agreement. And we can work on the bilateral basis in addition to the overarching European umbrella that we had. When we look at the Common Agenda on Migration and Mobility, CAM as we call it, which was actually signed in 2016, we find that a number of projects have been taken up, and we must thank the European institutions for the considerable support and help that we have received in this particular exercise. ICM has been our local partner, the Indian partner for many of these projects. And I think in many ways it has improved the level of awareness. It has brought about the modalities for the better and easier movement of professionals. It has also brought about better understanding on the two sides regarding how we can make this a win-win solution. I look forward very much to the discussions that will follow, because today's world is moving increasingly in the tech direction. It is also moving in the very highly sophisticated services. And I think we can look at possibilities where Indian technical workers, professionals, can plug into the 4IR kind of developments across Europe, where we can also fit into the service sector in the medical healthcare. And I think what we've seen coming out of COVID is that this is an area where I think there is great opportunities for collaboration, whether it is in areas like nursing, healthcare, or it is in areas like R&D for development of medicines and vaccines. And I am, as a diplomat, normally very optimistic about the future. But I always look at the gray side very carefully too. But I will say that in the balance, when I look at the emerging trends in the India EU mobility movement, the understandings that we have at the European institutional level as well as at the bilateral level, I have reason to be optimistic. But the other thing that I believe very sincerely is that we need discussion and we need more and more ideas to come from all of you, because all of you who are on the field, who've done all the research, will be able to tell us where we have our shortcomings in terms of the understanding. And we look forward to these discussions as an input which would help us and the European institutions work together towards something that is mutually beneficial. Once again, thank you very much for joining this webinar, and we hope we have a very productive one. Stay safe in COVID times. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll now introduce very briefly our moderator, Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, though he doesn't need an introduction. Professor Sachdeva is a Jean Monnet Chair, Coordinator, Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, and Chairperson, Center for European Studies in JNU. He is also Editor-in-Chief, International Studies. He has been a consultant with numerous international organizations and has written extensively on European Union and related issues. So with those few remarks, I'll hand over the proceedings to Professor Sachdeva.
Thank you, Dr. Surbi. Good afternoon. Mr. Sanjay Bhattacharya, Chairman ICM, Professor Jonathan Portes, King's College London, Ms. Alexandra Sa Carvalho from the DG Migration and Home, European Commission, Ms. Patricia de Grey, DG Employment, EC, Mr. Gagan Sabharwal, who is Senior Director with NASCOM, Ms. Sonu Iyer from Ernst & Young, Mr. Abagani Ramu is the Joint Secretary, MEA, and of course, Dr. Surbi Singh. She's the Chief Administrative Officer of the ICM. And I can also see a lot of names, those who have been following these issues for quite some time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation and opportunity to chair this very important conversation on looking at the possibilities of high-skilled migration from India to the EU. I'm thankful to Mr. Bhattacharya for introducing the subject and also setting the tone. We know that due to its demographic profile, most EU countries will continue to source outside labor, particularly skilled workforce. And if we have an appropriate policy framework in India, this is mainly because of India's youthful population and an elaborate higher education infrastructure. And I think, with the implementation of the new education policy, which has been recently announced by the Government of India, I think India may be, it will be very useful, this policy also to facilitate this mobility in the coming year, and particularly if we can also link up with many of other programs announced earlier by the Government of India, including the Skill India, etc. But, we also have to be very, very careful about, current political environment in Europe. For the last many years, there has been a lot of discussion in Europe about migration and refugee crisis. Throughout Europe, now there has also been rise of those political parties which are very critical about outside migration. So to improve, I think, EU-India migration and mobility governance, I think it is useful for Indian policymakers to clearly understand the dynamics of EU's external migration policy. Now, for the last 2 decades, the EU has been trying to develop a comprehensive approach to deal with legal migration as well as asylum and return policy. Now, Brussels is also trying to engage third countries like India through its global approach to migration and mobility framework. Now, this framework includes dialogue, like we have now with the EU, and also political, legal, and financial instruments, as well as many actions, program, and projects. Now, the EU, as we know, has a limited competence to offer legal migration into member states. Still, there are some very successful joint strategies where the EU and its member states together, they have harmonized their policies and worked out a mechanism for increasing legal migration from third countries. And one such example, which Mr. Bhattacharya also referred, is EU's blue card scheme. Now, we have seen that whenever there was any opportunity, Indians have been successful in utilizing legal forms of entry into the EU. So even when the blue card scheme is mainly implemented by Germany, now Indians have secured more than 20% of the total cards issued. And there is a lot of mobility of students and researchers from both sides, but there are also a lot of visa issues from both sides. So visa facilitation, it's not just Indian students, and researchers, they feel certain problems, but I think the similar kind of problems also faced from the Europeans researchers when they have to come to India for their research. So certain kind of visa facilitation agreement with the EU also could be very useful. Although numbers of Indian citizens are among top few countries which received resident permissions, it is still about 5% of total permits in the last few years, and a large number of them have been granted only by the UK. So when you look at the stock of at the end of every year, the numbers are even smaller. In the last few years, the stock of Indian citizens in overall permit issued is only about 3%. And within the EU, I think about 1/3 of the stocks in the UK. The rest of the stock has been in the last few years have been issued by Italy, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, and France. And in recent years, we have also seen some increase in countries like Sweden and Poland. Many surveys and studies have also found that Indian migrants, particularly skilled professionals and students, they are viewed very positively in Europe. Now, I have been following, India-EU relations now for many, many years. But what I have noticed that conversations on migration and mobility in the last few years are now becoming more and more serious. Now, EU is India's number one trade and investment partner, and we also have strategic partnership since 2004, and since 2007 we are also negotiating. I mean, at the moment the negotiations are frozen on this BTIA or free trade agreement. Recently, we also had very successful summit. Now, but now the geopolitics in Asia is changing. Europe is also becoming more suspicious about China, and India's relations, with EU is becoming now closer. Particularly, the political relations are becoming closer. We have also seen, we also have now this, for the last many years, this migration, high-level migration mobility dialogue. So within this context, I think we can really work out a very good framework for legal migration, not only for high-skilled professionals, which of course is the focus of today's discussion, but also, in fact, perhaps for relatively low-skilled, because there is also many countries now I can see within India, within Europe, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe. You look at Poland, Romania, etc., where there is also demand for those kind of skills. And then, of course, we also have to look at the prevention of irregular migration. So apart from working with the EU, I think we also in India also have to work. Also need to have an agreement with the key member states. I mean, some of the agreements already there, like with France, but some others are under progress. So, but whatever still we know about EU India or India EU migration, it's going to change significantly in the coming years. Now, we are talking today in the middle of a pandemic, and both India and Europe has been very badly affected by COVID-19. Economic situation is very difficult, both in India and also in Europe. And we also have now Brexit, which is, it's also going to have impact. So broad parameters concerning demography may not change drastically, but I think it's still very difficult, or it's becoming more and more difficult to predict when and how economic recovery is going to take place. Which sector? Because till now we had certain, ideas, certain studies, what was happening till now. But from next year, when the recovery is going to take place, what kind of new sectors, what kind of new policies, we really have to now redo many of the things which we have done so far. So let me now, first invite Professor Jonathan Portis. He is a professor of economic and public policy at King's College London. He has also spent most of his career as a civil servant in UK. And his current research is focused on immigration, labor mobility, and also, more importantly, changing relations between UK and the EU. And he has written recently a book on immigration, What Do We Know? And What Should We Do? From Sept. So, particularly, since we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 speakers and limited time, so maybe if every speaker can take roughly about 10 minutes, and then later on we can have some time for discussion. So maybe, Professor Portis, if you can just look into particularly what is happening inside Europe, and particularly the context of Brexit, and how this is going to have any kind of, if there is any impact, is going to be on India-EU migration or India-UK migration. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much indeed, Gulshan, for that kind introduction. And thanks to the India Center for inviting me to talk. It's an honor, and I'm always privileged to, when I have the chance to interact with the Indian organizations and government on the issue of migration. I'm grateful also to Sita Sharma, who introduced me and whom I have done some work previously for on EU-India migrations for the International Labour Organization. I'll start by saying that, I think the history of migration from the UK to India, from India to the UK is, of course, very well known, and it's been perhaps something that has exerted a fair amount of influence on my own personal and professional life. I was influenced as a child by my father's colleagues, economists at Oxford, in particular Vijay Joshi and Partha Dasgupta, who many of you will have heard of, and then later professional life as a civil servant by my very close friend and colleague and former boss, Sir Suma Chakrabarty, who's just stepped down as the president of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, all Britons who were born in India and of Indian origin, who've contributed a huge amount to British society and, in particular, to British to economics in the UK. Looking back, of course, the history of migration from India to Europe has largely been dominated by migration to the UK, and in that we've seen an evolution over time. Much of skilled migration from India to the UK was of in the 1950s, 60s, 70s of health professionals. But over time, it has broadened beyond that. And particularly in the last 20 years, we've seen a huge growth in two areas I would identify. The first is in that of ICT, and we have Gagan from NASCOM, who's going to speak in a minute, and I have previously done some work with NASCOM. The migration for work purposes of skilled migrants to the EU is now dominated by the ICT field, and in particular by the new business model of NASCOM's constituent companies, which is based to a very large extent on a sort of combination of outsourcing and migration-related contracting, where some of the work is done in India, but some is done on site, as it were, by employees of NASSCOM's constituent companies. And it's notable, if you look at the statistics for skilled migration to the UK, just how much of it is dominated, first of all, by Indians, and second of all, by people coming here, particularly through what we call the, slightly confusingly, the ICT route. Here, ICT referring not to information and communication technology, but to intra-company transfers. So you have, for example, large numbers of people who work for Tata who come to the UK for periods of between a few months and a few years to work on large contracts for big UK-based companies, and that has proved to be a very successful business model for those companies, and a very, as demonstrated by the fact of popularity, regarded as very much in the interest of the UK companies who contract with them. The other form of migration that I think has taken off over the last 10 and 20 years is particularly in the UK, is student-related migration, particularly in the 2000s, when it became much easier both for Indians to come here, but more crucially for Indian students to stay on after they'd completed their studies. That was, of course, always possible, and some of the people who that is the route by which, it's actually the route by which my parents came to the UK from the US, but also the route by which many of the well-known Indians in the UK came here. But it became much more of what you might call a mass market in the 2000s. That was reversed in the 2010s by the Theresa May as Home Secretary, who did not like either immigration or, in particular, foreign students, and a number of restrictions were imposed. But the current government is beginning to reverse that, and I'm hopeful that after Brexit we will see something of a resurgence. Meanwhile, in the rest of the the rest of the European Union now, of course, because we are no longer members of the European Union, Indian migration has in general been much less of an economic force. But there were attempts to expand skilled migration, and although it wasn't explicitly an objective that the skilled migrants in question should be Indians, I think in practice there was always a recognition that the sort of migrant type targeted by the Blue Card scheme, in particular, again, people with expertise in ICT, were always likely to be, in a very large part, from India. And indeed, I would say that where the Blue Card or Blue Card related schemes have been successful, it has very much been in the ICT field, and it has been with respect to Indian nationals. And I won't describe the findings of the study that I did for CETA at the ILO on, in particular, Indian migration to the Netherlands, but I think that is an excellent example of a successful attempt to broaden and deepen a skilled workers scheme, which in practice has had the effect of, to a very large extent, facilitating and successfully facilitating the movement of skilled Indians, particularly those working in ICT, to Europe. And I think our conclusion was that this should indeed serve as something of an example to other European countries that have tried, perhaps with less success, to promote skilled migration through versions of the Blue Card scheme. So I don't want to exceed my time. So where does that leave us now, both in the UK and in the EU? And I think, the first thing I would say was, there is a lot to be concerned about, both in terms of the economy generally and perhaps migration in particular, in respect of Brexit. As regards the India-UK migration, I think I am, perhaps for the first time in the last decade or so, relatively optimistic. The new scheme that the UK government proposes to introduce on January the 1st, 2021, when we exit the Brexit transition period, represents potentially, at least, a significant liberalisation with respect to skilled migration, and in particular, skilled migration from India. That's not to say that everything is wonderful about the new scheme. It will be much more restrictive with respect to people coming from elsewhere in the EU. But with respect to the type of migrants who come from India, it should represent a considerable liberalisation. The number of jobs for which migration will be, in principle, feasible through the new points-based system is much greater than currently exists. There are new provisions for a special healthcare visa with reduced fees and reduced bureaucracy, which should facilitate the movement of not just doctors and nurses, but other medical professionals to the UK. And perhaps most importantly, the government proposes to reintroduce a version of the post-study work scheme, which very successfully in the 2000s allowed Indians who came here to study and who graduated from UK universities to stay on for a period of 2 years to work. The government's proposing to reintroduce a somewhat more limited, but still relatively generous version of that scheme, which should substantially expand opportunities for Indian students to stay on in the UK. And I hope very much that they will take advantage of that. Turning now to the European Union, I think the picture there is more mixed, but there are still opportunities. And again, to some extent, these come perhaps from Brexit, because, of course, one of the major blockers to a EU-India accord on migration within perhaps the broader sphere of an EU-India free trade agreement was precisely the UK. The UK did not want migration to be part of any EU-India relationship because we thought that that was partly, again, a product of Theresa May's aversion to migration in general and frankly, to Indian students in particular. But with that roadblock gone, I think and would hope that the EU may be able to adopt a more constructive position towards the role of migration in the broader EU-India relationship. And the second reason why one might be more optimistic is, again, a byproduct of what, for the world as a whole, are perhaps more negative developments, and in particular, the increasing tension between the EU and both China and the US, geopolitically and in terms of trade and economic relationships. To put it bluntly, the EU needs to, with the deterioration in the EU-US relationship and the increasingly conflictual relationship between China and the rest of the world in terms of economics and trade, the EU needs all the friends and all the cooperative relationships that it can get in terms of economics and trade. And the EU really cannot afford to be put in the position where the US is India's preferred partner in terms of trade and migration relationships. So I think the imperative is very much on the EU to adopt a constructive approach towards India that includes migration flows as part of a broader relationship. Of course, we have representatives from the Commission here, so I think, given the time, I will stop there and just say that thanks again for inviting me. And as I say, there are a lot of things to echo what the Secretary said. There are many reasons to be worried about the state of the world. There are many reasons to be worried about the state of Europe and the state of the UK. But on migration, I remain, and in particular, migration from India, I remain resolutely optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Portis, for this optimistic note. And two very interesting points you made. One, of course, is your reference to geopolitics. Now we'll come back to this discussion later because earlier, this wasn't the issue which we thought that it's going to decide, in a very big way because we were looking more technical, economic, and those are the kind of issues. But I think this is one issue which you're absolutely right might be a determining factor in many, many even migration policies in the years to come. And the second interesting thing is that so long as UK was part of EU, so this you see was a kind of a roadblock to India-EU agreement. Once they are out, now there's more opportunities between India and EU. Suddenly you see becoming more liberalized environment as far as the migration is concerned. So I think we'll come back to some of these points later for the discussion. Let me now invite Ms. Alexandra Cavallo. She's administrator at the European Commission with the DG Migration and Home Affairs. And earlier she also served as a Directorate General for the Enterprise and Industry for Autonomous Industry Unit. She's graduate in International Relations and Administration, Political Science from University of Lisbon and College of Europe. Ms. Alexandra Cavallo.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you so much for ICM for giving us the opportunity to also address all these colleagues interested in the EU-India relationship. Just a small word, my colleague Patricia de Grey is also participating here, but she will not make a full presentation like this. We are shorter and we leave more time for questions and answers. So she's available for comments and questions, but I will make the presentation of what's going on in this area in the European Commission. As referred by Professor, I am working in the Legal Migration Unit of DG Migration and Home Affairs. We are in charge of the legal framework for legal migration into the EU. This does not apply to Ireland and Denmark, so please consider this. And even before Brexit, it did not apply to the UK. So for this, the Brexit does not have a major impact on how we are working with member states for the purposes of legal migration. It will have impact on other issues. For instance, I would say just like a bracket here. I think that the main issue here from 1st of January next year is that the posted workers directive will not apply anymore. So which means that postings of people that are third country nationals, Indians that are working in the UK, that now could be posted to other member states for their work, for providing services, namely, they will not be able to do that anymore. They will go through a different procedure as a third country national. So I would say this is the major impact of Brexit in this area. Otherwise, we already had two different systems, two different schemes. For instance, for ICT, the blue card applied only also to the EU 25 members and not to UK, Ireland and Denmark. So I don't think you'll feel a big difference then from next year. As for our legal migration framework at EU level, we have to say that it's a recent policy, and as you very well mentioned, it's it's something that is shared with member states in a very sensitive equilibrium balance. We felt the need, or the EU felt the need to have common rules on migration and asylum only after deciding to go forward with a common free movement space, Schengen. So not only free movement of people, but really an area where your documents are not necessarily, are not normally checked when you move from between countries, and where people get into a car in Lisbon, where I come from, and can reach Poland or the Slovak Republic without ever being stopped in a normal situation. And so there was a feeling that with these Schengen rules that really facilitated movement between the member states, there should be an effort to create also measures for those third country nationals that are working in one of the member states, so that there would be a level playing field and people would not shop for easier ways to come into this open space from one member state, and also to create more trust between member states that they were applying common rules for accepting third country nationals or into the EU. I just another bracket. Our rules are not nationality linked, so there are no schemes for Indians or for Chinese or for Americans. These schemes that we have been developing in the last 20 years apply to all third country nationals without any nationality relevance, and we are quite eager to maintain this way. So the objectives of this policy that we developed were really, like I mentioned, to have a more efficient management of migration, creating trust between member states, and helping that the Schengen space could work well. We also had another objective that comes from the treaty, which is to ensure fair treatment of people that come from other states. So this is important, and the rules in member states before this effort were quite different. So they would sometimes have quite a lot of restrictions to third country nationals to accede or to be able to enjoy their social rights. So now these are this equality of treatment or fair treatment is ensured at EU level by the European Court of Justice. So this is an important aspect, and it's also important for having trust between member states that we are not helping some kind of dumping or that people come for being exploited in the EU. We know that unfortunately the situation on the ground is sometimes less than perfect regarding what we would like to, but we have the instruments, we have the legal instruments, we have the courts working for this, and so the rules are there. Finally, another objective that we had that is not in the treaty but has become quite central to the action that we have, and that's linked to the blue card that was already mentioned and to the ICT scheme that Professor Port has also referred, and which I am in charge in the DG. We have been looking at the competitiveness of the European Union to attract foreign talent, and here indeed India and the Indian talent is quite central in this effort. We felt that we were not as good as some other spaces in our normal would say like competitors in the world. We were not as efficient at attracting and also at retaining talent as, for instance, US or Canada or Australia. So we looked a bit of what's going on, and that's why we have been working hard to have the ICT scheme working well, and it's quite a recent scheme, and we really have been focusing on making it attractive to companies in India. And here I have to give a word to Gagan, who has been really helpful on helping us in this effort to make the ICT scheme working well. We have been working also to attract more students. Indeed, UK is world renowned for attracting the students, and while also with the help of an international language there, a global language in its offer, but EU has struggled a bit more, and things are changing. So a lot of efforts have been developed by universities themselves, right, by member states, but also we have now a scheme, an improved scheme for students and for researchers that come to the EU, which has the objective of change this. And again, like Professor Porter has mentioned for the UK, one important advantage of the new scheme for students is that they can stay in the EU for a few months after finalizing their studies to look for a job. So they don't need to have already a job to stay, but they can stay to look for a job. So competitiveness and attraction of talent have been also taking some space in the objectives of our policies and of our legal framework in this area. So how do we do this? In a perfect world, we should have some kind of immigration code, like the UK is now developing a new one for next year, and where somebody that comes from outside would find a European way to deal with his or her case, being him or her highly skilled worker, or medium one, or low skilled worker, or a student, researcher, etc. The fact is that we were not able to do that at EU level due to resistance from member states. This resistance, as already referred by Professor Gulshan Shatva, are not getting better. So we do not look for having a general scheme and general immigration code in the short or medium term. This was an objective 20 years ago, and we dropped it and became a bit more realistic. So what did we do when we found out that it was not possible to have a general scheme? It has been to have different instruments for different categories of people that come to the EU from third countries. This is not very helpful for these people, or for even for our member states, because it's quite a complex system, but is what we can offer. So currently, we do not cover every category of worker or of person that comes into the EU. We cover mainly highly skilled workers. Then we also cover seasonal workers, which is the first scheme at EU level that deals with with low skilled workers that come for specific activities related to the season. So normally things related to tourism and to agriculture. And we have done some horizontal schemes that help in the other objectives that we have, notably regarding fair treatment. So there is a quite ambitious and I would say quite generous scheme for family reunification of third country nationals in the EU, which applies, so for instance, for an Indian person who is working in the EU and wants to reunify with his or her partner and children. There are quite the rules that apply are European rules, and they are quite generous here. We have a quite important scheme also, or rules that mean that if you are 5 years working in the EU, or if you are legally in the EU for 5 years, you can ask for a long-term residence permit, which gives you a very, I would say, a lot of safety that you will be treated as equal to a EU citizen, and that it will be difficult to the member state will need really a very good reason to ask the person to leave the territory, and that also gives advanced rights for EU mobility, because in the EU, third country nationals do not benefit from a free movement of workers. So these schemes are horizontal. We have also a directive that establishes the general rules for issuing a permit, which is the Single Permit Directive, and which has made member states drop the need that existed for having a residence and a work permit that are dealt differently by different authorities. So now when you get a permit to the EU, you can work and you can reside with that. And it also means that you have a set of rights that are close to equal treatment with EU citizens that are established by by European law, and so that can be challenged in the courts based on European law and not on national law. So these are the horizontal, and then we have specific rules for specific categories that I have mentioned in general. So for students and researchers, for the intra-corporate transferees, for seasonal workers, and for I'm missing something. Seasonal work and the blue card, of course, that was already mentioned. Sorry, for highly skilled workers. Most of these schemes are quite new. The first three that I mentioned are quite new, so they are being implemented. So our effort now is not to revise them or to reopen them. Our objective is that they work well in the framework that exists. The blue card is different. It's older, it has more than 10 years, and we found out already a few years ago that there were improvements that could be made. Indeed, as referred before, there are only a few member states that are using it. A lot of member states are quite jealous on what they say they're migrants. So when they go through the full process of admitting somebody, they want that this person stays in their territory. So they prefer to have a national scheme. So what we have proposed some years ago was to improve the blue card, and notably making it a single scheme for highly skilled workers in the EU, and to improve quite dramatically the intra-EU mobility possibilities for people holding blue cards. For those who follow, this has been difficult. Again, the environment for discussing legal migration is not great in several member states, not all, gratefully, but for some member states. And as I said, a lot of member states are quite jealous on their own schemes. So we will soon publish, hopefully at the end of this month, the new proposals to try to unblock this negotiation. So hopefully soon there will be a new blue card available at EU level that will try to overcome the difficulties that were felt with the current one. In between, we have to say that we are quite happy that the blue card is being more and more used by third country nationals. We had, for instance, 3,006 people using it in 2012. And in 2018, which was the year we have numbers, the latest numbers, we have 32,000. So it's really almost 10 times more people using blue card. Indians, as you have mentioned already, are one of the main nationalities using the blue card. So let's say that we can still improve and try to work for using this blue card, but we are really looking forward for the revised version of this. So of course I can answer any questions on any of these schemes if these come from the participants in the seminar. We were asked from ICM to also mention a bit how does this relate, what is the situation of the what is the labor market situation in the EU, and what is the link with the legal migration framework. Of course, our legal, especially for workers, naturally, the labor market situation in a member state is important. Of course, member states retain the freedom to impose quotas to workers, to migrant workers, with exception normally for ICTs, because under our WTO commitments, we are quite restricted on imposing quotas to ICTs. But for other categories of workers, member states can impose quotas. In fact, they do not for most cases, but still there is this link. So if a member state considers that its labor market is now under stress and that they cannot accommodate migrants, they can still impose quotas for entry in most cases. Of course, member states have been using labor migration to address shortages they have on skills, on labor. And the kind of changes that we did to our legislation that I mentioned before have this in mind. For instance, the issue of the students that can stay. Of course, they are linked to the recognition that there are shortages in some member states. In some sectors, the situation is very different from member state or from region to region. But we recognized this was an issue, so we tried to adapt to these needs. It's also noted, we can note that until the beginning of this year, the growth of labor force in the EU has been very much linked to labor migration. So it was mentioned already that the demography of the EU and the issues that are related to this. So this has been studied and it's an issue. We have recognized that we need to work more on job matching. This needs to be done at different levels, at local level, that knows better the needs of the region or of the sub-region of the member state. But there was a recognition that we need to work more on job matching. There was a study, if you are interested on these issues, there was an OECD study done together with the Commission on these, where there are different proposals to develop these, and these are under discussion. So something that is in our agenda, although there is no ready-made product to present to you. We have noted, of course, regarding labor market, that each time there is a big crisis in the EU, there is also a reduction of labor migration to the EU. That's obvious. We don't need to be it's quite natural. But for instance, labor migration fell quite a lot in the EU in 2008 and 2011. So the big crisis we had recently, but it has been rising since 2014. And something that is interesting to note is that while general labor migration was reduced during this crisis, in the second crisis in 2011, we didn't feel the impact for highly skilled migrants. So it was a general impact, but there was not a reduction in the admissions of highly skilled workers. So what happens now with the crisis that we are currently feeling, and that is going quite where the impact is felt very strongly in some member states. It's still a bit too early to know what will be the impact, but I would say that from what we feel, there's more a change, as has been said before, of the needs. So probably there will be an impact on worker labor migration, or migration for work in general, but I'm not so sure. For instance, in the IT sector, I would like to hear from Gagan what are his feelings. We would say that this quick transition for a virtual workspace and school space, I would not think that for the IT sector there will be a huge impact, for instance, for the needs and shortages that were already being felt in the EU before. However, this has also shown that we can work from different places. So maybe in some cases you don't need a person to come physically to another continent to do the work. So it's really very open, and the situation is very volatile. But still, it's not a good situation for the labor market. It's the unemployment in the EU is expected to rise to around 9 to 10% this year, while the situation had been quite positive in most member states until the end of last year. There are a lot of situations of reduction of hours of work. There are situations of what in the UK is called the furlough, so the people that are paid by the state to keep their contracts. And we have also noticed that people that are more vulnerable are the ones that also are feeling more strongly this impact of the crisis in the EU. And of course, these include the migrant workers. However, we have also noticed that now that we looked a bit differently to the kind of work that people are doing, and we felt that what we are calling the essential jobs are a bit different from those we are normally used to think about as essential. We have seen also that migrant workers are represented very strongly in these essential work jobs that kept on working while we came back. While we came to our apartments or to our houses to work remotely. For instance, we have a study that points that while the third country nationals are around 4% of the population in the EU, they are around 10 to 15% of those who have these essential jobs. So it's not proportional representation. And if you go to some subsectors, like, for instance, like basic services of cleaning, of maintenance, etc., you get to a third of the jobs in the EU. So at the same time, we hope that people got a bit more the idea of how important these workers are for keeping our economies alive in the EU. So, as I said, it's very hard to make projections here on the labor market. We continue to work for that, so that the schemes that exist work well, and that as soon as the COVID measures and restrictions are raised, people can still come to the EU. Please note that we have made the recommendations to member states that are not like recommendations that they are not mandatory, but we recommend it to member states to let people in if they have already a valid permit. So hopefully you don't have many cases of people with a permit that cannot come back to the EU to their jobs when they are in India for some case. We are, of course, working still to have the blue card revised and more attractive. And we are also working to have a strong and effective dialogue with India in these areas. And so of course, we keep open to receive your comments and questions. And again, as said before, I'm very happy and thankful for being able to speak to you. I think now for too much time, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Alexandra Cavallo. I mean, I think you made 2-3 points very clear. One, of course, is that even before Brexit happened, we had two different systems. So there may not be huge significant impact of Brexit as far as the migration policies are concerned. And the second thing, whatever we might talk about geopolitics, but as far as the EU policies to attract talented workers are concerned, there is no special treatment. And the third thing is that now there'll be a lot of efforts to attract students and researchers, and of course there will be new blue card scheme. Now, maybe later on in our question and answer session, one point perhaps it will be useful for us to know in India, because as you know, the competencies are very clearly defined within EU. So in the area of migration, Indian policymakers, where they should really be focusing when they're talking to EU, and where they should be really focusing when they're talking to member states, because sometimes that confusion unnecessarily may create expectations, and then later on perhaps even disappointment that didn't happen. So that might be pretty useful for people, those who do not follow very clearly the competency system within EU. So now we have a limited time. The next speaker is Mr. Gagan Sabharwal. He is the Senior Director of NASCOM, and he leads the International Trade Policy Initiative, and he is the Head of Strategic Market Initiative, and he has rich experience of more than 22 years. And more than 16 years, within the IT BPO industry. I know that he has a huge experience, in particular in the IT sector, and with the EU and the mobility of Indian IT professionals in EU. So, if you can just tell us, where we are and what are the major issues in the next. Thank you, Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much, my esteemed co-panelists. Good to see all of you. And thank you very much, ICM, for giving us the opportunity to put forward, how we see this whole in your words, migration issue. We don't like to call this as migration issue because we believe that our member companies and the constituents that we represent are not in business of migration. Yes, this ironic, this whole conference is all about migration, and but we don't do migration. We just do short-term worker mobility. So thank you very much again, Senior Secretary, Joint Secretary, and good to see you, Alex, again. Not too long ago, we did a similar initiative with Alexandra and her colleagues, with European Commission, with ILO. I think it was on 30th of April, with the group of industry members to help them gather feedback from our constituents. So let me, sort of give you an idea what is the contribution of the Indian IT industry with respect to EU's intake of foreign workers, skilled workers, and so on. So, as I said, we use various instruments issued by European Commission while transferring workers for short-term mobility, but we never do migration because we're not in business of helping people migrate to EU or UK or America from India. As far as we are concerned, I think this also very much gels well with the global corporations, not just the Indian corporations, but many global corporations were based in India. They also adopt a similar model. So it's all about skills. Wherever you win an order, you want a person to be deputed for a short duration of time. It's impossible for you to hire a local person and hire and fire them in 1 year or 2 years. So essentially, you have to bring in a specialist who can be productive from day one. And that's essentially what we do. But as the luck would have it, in case of IT business these days, or even earlier, the only 2 things or 3 things that travel across international boundaries are people or the human assets, the money or the capital, and the IP. So within these 3, and there's no other thing that we export or import with respect to delivering of IT services solutions. And this is true for all global corporations. So the most complex one of this is the people mobility, because when people move, their lives move. When they move, their families move, and along with them, children, dependents, parents, and so on and so forth. So it's a very complex arena. Unlike data security and privacy, where yes, that also is not that's also very complex, should I say? But when people move, they bring in their own level of complexities involved. So what I'm trying to convey over here is that while this is a migration topic and conversation, but we essentially only do short-term worker mobility, and we are not at all interested in migration. But the only tools that you possibly can make use of which is your passport and the visas or the work permit, because unless until you have those, you can't travel an international, you can't cross the international boundaries. So that's the predicament that we are in. So we like to call this as a mode 4 kind of treatment, where people are going to deliver contracts rather than making that country as their home. Some of them eventually choose to stay back, which is totally a personal decision. But globally, companies normally do not encourage people going and staying for life, because they lose one mobile resource who may be productive on a project elsewhere in some other country, in some other city. So that's where we are, and in terms of numbers, I think my co-panelists have shared with you some numbers. But I think as a thumb rule, India probably is the largest, constituent that sort of gets people from outside of Europe inside into Europe. And within the Indian population, I think 75% can be attributed to the Indian IT sector. This is across whether, UK or EU or any other country. So yes, so our share normally is very large in terms of people, work permits, visas, etc., and so on. I remember in 2008, I published a small white paper about this ironic situation within EU, where we have a Schengen visa. It allows you to move within European Union easily, but we do not have a Schengen work permit, so to say. And it was so nice to see, ICT coming alive in 2016 after a great deal of efforts, because it allows you the intra-EU mobility, and it was designed to take care of the inconsistencies that you normally have when different countries apply different regimes for their domestic policy visas that they normally were issuing. Now, I must emphasize over here that there are broadly three types of work permits that we use. One, we've heard many people say about blue cards. Second, being the intra-corporate transferee visa. And third, even in some countries today, there are domestic work permits which are still available. They call it by different names, but single permit, for highly skilled workers, mobility, and so on. So, if you ask us as an industry, we would prefer that each and every individual that goes out or goes into EU probably should go out on ICT visa, because that's the closest that we do, where we transfer people for short durations and then assign them to our next location and so on and so forth. But in some cases, companies are forced to take blue cards or domestic work permits because there are still some, hurdles that we have with respect to ICT, the way it has been implemented by some of the member states. And we've shared this feedback very candidly and honestly with Alexandra and her colleagues in DG Home over the past few years. And we'll continue to do that because we would like to send a person from India, let's say, to EU for short duration, provided it helps us consistency, predictability, salary levels, how we apply social security, and so on and so forth. So I'll share with you some of the ironic issues that we are currently having to deal with. But before I get into the improvement areas in case of ICT work permit or comparing blue card regime with it, I think I must mention over here that in past 5 or 6 months we've seen the way this COVID era has unfolded across all geographies. This whole business model of sending people for short duration or for long duration is currently under threat. And our assessment is that if this continues for next 1.5 years, 2 years, then I guess the global corporations, as well as the corporations who serve them for IT services, will get used to delivering contracts, either work from home or work from office or work from remote locations. So if this continues for long, then if we were sending, let's say, 1,000 units earlier, we'll probably come down to about 10% of that traffic if this continues for long. But if it opens up in next 4, 5, 6 months, I guess there will be a huge pent-up demand. People who are stuck will want to go and find their jobs and their locations at the customer side and so on and so forth. So let me share with you, what are the intricacies involved with respect to ICT, for instance, which is our favorite category. I think Belgium, I don't know, maybe Alex can correct me, Belgium was the last off the block to implement the intra-corporate transferee regime. I don't know whether they've still done it or not, because in past 5 or 6 months, we've not actually used this category. One major problem that we face in a couple of member states is the client-side work. Now, this is the crux of the matter, why an IT company would send an engineer on site in UK or in France or elsewhere, is because the customer location needs that skill set and expertise. So in case of France and Italy, they don't allow you to work at client side. Now, if that's the case, then this becomes a non-starter for us. So if he can't put a person at the client side to work at and manage that location through ICT visa, then this visa is no use for us. So we will rather opt for a local work permit that they offer, or maybe a blue card, and so on and so forth. But why don't we willingly take blue card? Is because when you send a person on blue card, you lose the right to that person. That person then becomes a free soul. He or she is free to work within your organization after shifted abroad, or they could choose a different employer and start working for them. So if our companies start sending people on blue card, they essentially lose control because they can, at any given point of time, just leave the existing employer and move on to the new employer. So on an ideal day scenario, I don't think any company would like to lose that skill set that they're sending to a customer location in a jiffy. So that's the one of the reasons why we actually don't prefer blue card as corporations. Now, in case of this ICT regime was brought in to bring down the inconsistencies involved with respect to timelines, processing, and so on and so forth. But we've seen that these inconsistencies still remain in some form or the other. Some countries adjudicate a visa, let's say in Cologne or Bonn, but the stamping happens in India. The decision actually happens in the member states, but stamping happens in India. In some cases, the decision as well as stamping happens in India. So in those cases, the processing time is extremely short, 4 weeks, and you get the visa and person can go. But in other cases, it takes you as long as 3 months, maybe 12 weeks or 14 weeks, and so on and so forth. So those kind of inconsistencies still remain. Another reason why we actually don't prefer a blue card, let me give you this example, is because in some member states, for example, Germany has a minimum legal wage or minimum threshold that you have to pay. But in Sweden, they don't. So you're always in a quandary, what figures will be the right minimum legal wage and so on and so forth. Another case in point is that when you send a person to Germany on an ICT, the intra-corporate transfer visa, the salary levels are higher than when you send a person on a blue card. So just to give you a sense, in case of ICT, the figure is 55 to 60,000 euros. But in case of blue card, it's about 43 to 50,000 euros. So companies that have to do a toss of coin, should I send this person on blue card because I end up saving some money, but I end up losing a control of my employee. If I send a person on ICT, then there's a different application of social security norms as well in both of these cases. So these are some of the intricacies involved, and I'm just being mindful of the time over here. So that's why in some cases, like in France, as I said, if we are not allowed to work on client side, we have no other option but to opt for a domestic work permit. Even in case of salaries, within intra-EU mobility, it becomes a problem area, with respect to ICT. If a person is working in Germany, you have your family and you have kids going to school in Germany, and you go across the border, let's say to Austria or France or wherever, to work for, let's say, 3 months or so. And what happens if your employer starts paying you salary, entire part of it in France? You would say, sorry, my family is in Germany. I need more money in Germany than in France because in France, I'm just alone. So those issues have now cropped up. In case of SSA, the totalization treaty, India currently has a totalization treaty with majority of these European member states, with few exceptions. But the problem now that we're foreseeing is that if your primary location happens to be Germany and you move across Austria, then the Austrian authorities say, sorry, you have a certificate of coverage from EPFO for Germany and not for Austria. So I can't honor this certificate because India currently does not issue the multi-country COCs at the moment. So that's one case in point which I think we would want Indian authorities to look into, or how we cross this particular bridge. So these are some of the issues that as we have seen them crop up. I think I can go on and on till the cows come home. But still, generally speaking, we are very happy with the way ICT has been implemented. Yes, there are few shortcomings, and they will continue to be there with any given visa regime. There will always be a problem. But I think the attitude of our colleagues from European Commission has been wonderful. We have a wonderful working relationship with Alexandra and her colleagues, and we will continue to funnel those feedbacks to them. I'll stop over here. I know I've sort of exceeded my time limit and probably come back later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gagan. In fact, you have very important point, but we are just since there is very limited time now, and in fact I can see a lot of speakers here otherwise. So basically, what you're saying is that we are not we don't do migration. We are interested basically in short-term work, and so that's basically is more. Many of the things can be resolved if we have actually FTA negotiation and mode 4 within that is resolved. That will be much more useful than perhaps looking into many of the EU policies. Thank you for making this very important point. So now we have last listed speaker, Ms. Sonu Iyer. She's a partner and National Leader People Advisory Group at Ernst & Young. Ms. Sonu Iyer.
Many thanks, Gulshan, if I may call you Gulshan.
Yeah, sure.
It's nice to be in the company of such esteemed panel and the guests on the call. I think, many aspects of migration have been talked about, but, when I look at it, one small yet critical aspect of migration is the social security consideration. And Gagan started to talk about that, but I'll go a little more deep into it, and the fact that EU member states have been the most supportive as far as India is concerned in terms of the social security agreements that we've signed with EU member states. So we have about 12 out of the total 20 agreements that we have in place as part of the India Social Security Agreement Network. 12 of these agreements are with the EU member states. And I think it is that spirit of reciprocity that really has brought India into a center stage, being able to talk about portability of benefits for its Indian population as they continue to migrate or go on for short-term or long-term assignments to different parts of the world. And of course, the benefits from a social security perspective, we know totalization of the period, which allows them to be able to get the pension benefit even after working in other countries. There is also the detachment from legislation by getting a certificate of coverage so that you don't have to pay social security in the other country. The ability to export benefit, as in when if you've contributed in a host country, the ability to get pension is been a major cause, major reason for relief for many of the people who've contributed into social security of the home countries. So from that perspective, I think the social security agreements play a very critical role. Yet, interest of time, I know I need to give time to question, but so I want to be able to point out to some challenges that we see in the social security agreements that India has negotiated. Now, if you look at it from the perspective of the fact that some of these agreements actually do not give any window for full coverage. Like, with Germany, you would not get the coverage for health and social security health benefits. So you may have a partial coverage under the India-German Social Security Agreement. You may go with COC from India, yet because it's not a full-fledged social security agreement, one is not able to avail the full benefit, and that is something that both governments and maybe EU in particular needs to say, how do we get to more comprehensive coverage under the social security agreements? This partial exemption really doesn't support the cause fully. The other part of it is in terms of the whole administrative process on both ends. How do we ease that further? Of course, India has made a good stride in terms of digitizing COCs. The time taken to issue a COC has considerably reduced. Yet there could be more that could be done towards that. In terms of a framework of agreement that could be there, I think this was also a suggestion of the EU Parliament that there should be a consistent framework that could be used for entering into social security agreements. And India came as a reference point, though it was in the larger context of agreements being signed with BRIC countries. But that would again be a good step forward in reducing, different areas of gaps that we see in different social securities agreements that India signs. So I think the forum such as this and the continued dialogue between EU member states and India would be most helpful, in continuing this good work that has started. Because without social security agreements for employers and employees to go and take up employment overseas is a big challenge. And Indian employers have benefited greatly from the agreements that have been signed. It's a cause of great, it's also a reason for great comfort for employees because, they know that they are tied back to the home country and their provident fund is safe. So I think my suggestion, other than what I've already said, I don't want to repeat, but is that this dialogue and this engagement ought to continue on a regular basis so that we are able to come towards comprehensive social security agreements. And those member states where we yet to sign a social security agreement, hopefully we will get there soon as well. Many thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Sonu, for in a very short time you were able to really convey the message that the importance of social security agreements and how we can really make them more comprehensive, and how this continuing dialogue between India and EU is really helping slowly to kind of, bringing more ideas at the same time clarifying things to all the actors involved. Now, we have.
I did race through my.
So I think you have to unmute yourself. No?
I'm saying I did race through my pitch, but I just wanted others to get a chance to ask questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your cooperation. Yeah. We were supposed to finish at 4:30. I think maybe we can just take liberty of another 10 minutes or so if Surbi allows us to do that. So what we can do is, I can see a lot of very, important people, those who have been working in this India-EU migration issues, apart from the listed speakers. So can I just may ask now, Sita Sharma, if she's the technical lead of India, within ILO, working on this, mobility and migration dialogue. Sita, would you like to come in for 2 minutes to make up any point after the discussion we had so far?
Thanks so much, Dr. Gulshan, and it's been great to listen to all the panelists, each one of which we are working with separately. So we are working with each one of you. That's great. But just, one thing that I'd like any of you to reflect on the panel, maybe even Dr. Gulshan, is something that I miss on the India-EU dialogue very often, is the role of the diaspora. The diaspora in both UK, US, for example, plays a very, very large role in terms of influences of bridging gaps. I don't find that the diaspora in the EU is actually very, sort of really just like to hear from any of the panelists, how do they feel, and particularly maybe even a reflection from Secretary Sonjoy, who can also perhaps tell us, how they see diaspora engagement on the EU corridor. Thanks, Gulshan.
Thank you, Sita, for bringing this issue of diaspora. So may I just now again ask, I can also see Naujawan Haudiwala. Can you have any specific point to make?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gulshan. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, it's interesting to be discussing this topic with so many of the relevant stakeholders. I'm also pleased to see the Secretary and Joint Secretary be joining us, and also representatives of the European delegation. ICMPD, through its project with the EU and the Ministry of External Affairs in support of the Common Agenda on Migration and Mobility that was signed in 2016, has been trying to peel back some of the layers related to labor migration. And what I would like to do with just my 2 minutes of time is to list or share some of the key tools that are available as a result of this project that has been jointly implemented by the ILO and ICMPD. The first, of course, is related to the point that was just mentioned by Sita, the diaspora studies. We've done 2 diaspora studies in Germany and Ireland, and where we feel that the diaspora have been actually quite active in the role of labor migration. They've offered extensive emergency support, most recently in the COVID-19 pandemic, to members of the Indian community that have been stuck in the European member states as a result of the quarantine and the travel blockages. We've also seen that student associations play a very key role in Germany in ensuring the integration of future migrants that come from India. And lastly, but not least, we've also seen an increased role of diaspora communities when it comes to playing the role of network. So I would love to share those reports with you, and we will be doing that in due course. Another interesting topic which has been raised by multiple speakers is the role of students and the future of student mobility to Europe from India. And on that regard, the project has been quite successful in lending its efforts towards a student checklist, which I think would be very interesting to the officers of the POE and the PGE that are in attendance today, because student mobility has also been plagued with a lot of false advertising or risky endeavors. And so here, the student checklist really tries to offer some key questions to students that are planning to go to Europe so that they don't get into tricky situations that can be posing a risk. The last point I want to make that the project has been successful in being able to do with the cooperation of the Ministry of External Affairs and European member states is offer some key baseline data on the mobility trends between EU and India. Much of the data that has been shared today has a great deal of importance when policymakers are making decisions on which angles to pursue. So many of the speakers have identified some key challenges, but also key opportunities. But data is key to being able to make sure that we prioritize correctly. And in this regard, we're very proud to be working with the Ministry of External Affairs in developing a baseline report on the mobility angles that have been have taken over the last few years. With that, I would like to stop, and of course, I raise the question to all of you as to where do you see the future of mobility going in the likelihood of the work of recruitment agents? How recruitment agents can play a role in the future of mobility to Europe?
Thank you, Naujat. Before I just go to Secretary Bhattacharya for diaspora, because there are 2-3 questions about diaspora. Professor Khadaria, if he wants to come in for a minute, Professor Khadaria.
Thank you, Gulshan. It has been very nice listening to all the presentations and both sides, from the European side as well as the Indian side. You see, I'm sure you are very familiar with the origin of the blue card. It was not an not an autonomous creation of the EU itself. It was a reaction to the 9/11 development in the United States, which actually curtailed the mobility to the United States, and that was an opportunity that the EU thought it would tap on. And at that point in time, I was actually asked to come online on BBC to comment, and the BBC was, flashing and having different people from all the European Union countries to comment all throughout the night. That was reflective of the issue that the main challenge was harmonization across the states of the member states of the European Union. And that challenge, I think, I was hoping that that challenge has been reduced by now. But after listening to Sonu, I think that challenge still continues, because every state perhaps has its own, stake of a different kind, which does not harmonize with the other states. That is very, very important. And that perhaps also answers partly the question of that Sita asked, that why there is no diaspora. Because the diaspora itself, the migrant people in the EU feel divided. They have different challenges. They do not have a common, issue to deal with when they are in different states. So that, I think, is extremely important. When it comes to labor market issues, highly skilled migrants, I think NASCOM, we just heard that they are not into migration, but they look only at mode 4, which is temporary, mobility of professionals. I think, there was great deal of interest at one point in time when the McKinsey NASCOM report was out, 2005. And that was actually trying to tell us what kind of trajectory the Indian IT professionals particularly would have, not only in the United States, but in countries like Germany and so on. So that the slogan that came out immediately after, the blue card, which wanted to invite about 20,000 Indian IT professionals to Germany, was the street protest, which the slogan was "In the Stadtfinder." Why Indians? Why not German children? So I think these are some of the issues which actually pinpoint to the issue of how long one can think it will take for total harmonization of the policies across the European member states. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Khadaria. Now, may I just ask involve diaspora, and what kind of engagement I mean, it's your
Professor Sachdeva, sorry to interrupt, but I think Secretary had to leave for another meeting.
all right.
So we may give the floor back to the speakers for their thoughts.
All right. So may I now ask Professor Portis if he has further anything to add after the discussion, in 1 or 2 minutes? Professor Portis?
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. I'll be very brief. Thank you very much for this very useful discussion. It's been enlightening to me. As I said, I think I am. I do remain optimistic about the prospects. I think it is difficult. I sympathise to some extent with Indian colleagues, and I think I get a sense of frustration with the slowness and perhaps the way in which the European Union moves at the speed of the slowest member sometimes. But I think there is an opportunity to inject some sense of urgency in some of the topics that have been discussed today. And I hope that, again, while Brexit overall may have many negative aspects, I think that there is a potential here for Brexit to be positive, both from the perspective of UK-India migration links and EU-India migration links, and indeed may even promote a sense of constructive competition for which of us can do better in maintaining and expanding those links in future. And I certainly hope that will be the case.
Thank you, Professor Portis. May I ask now Alexander Sakawalo, particularly if you can also point down the competencies.
Thank you so much. It's very hard to explain the subtleties of the sharing of competence between the EU and its member states in 1 minute, but I will try. So I think I can give you an image. At the European Union, for instance, for the ICT scheme, we are 2 colleagues working around 20% time for the ICT files. So if you think of what we can do at EU level, you already have an image of that. The implementation of the rules is in the hands of member states. However, they need to apply the rules respecting the EU law. So what is essential here, and it goes in line what ICMPD and their other colleagues mentioned, is there is information. You need to know what are the rules that exist at EU level to be able to defend yourself if you feel that the member states are not applying them correctly. And please note that our door or our email is also always open to receive complaints, comments, etc. Like Gagan, he came to us since a long time, and we have a very good dialogue. We have with NASCOM, which is extremely useful for us when we go back to the member states and call them to apply better or to apply at all this or that rule that is not being applied correctly. The meeting I had before this one was with Spain to do exactly that based on feedback from stakeholders. So we have this contact with NASCOM, but this is not exclusive. Any person or any association can come to us, but be clear that we cannot solve specific problems. If you go into trouble in one member state or in one consulate, we will not solve this. So the member states implement the rules, the EU establishes the rules, in some cases, of course, and then verifies if these are being applied. So we are what we call the defender of the treaty, so the guardian of the treaty for this. So it's very hard to go into detail, but for instance, the social security issue here, again, is interesting in this share of competencies. Currently, some member states have bilateral agreements with you. There is no EU level agreement, but at the same time, there is no legal limitation not to have a EU-India social security agreement if it is the interest of India, of the EU, and of the member states. So for the moment, for any social security issues, you need to deal with the member state where they occur, knowing that for the categories that are covered by EU legislation, categories of workers, you have also rules that come from the directives that apply there. So I'm not sure if I created more confusion than I tried to explain, but your first entry point will always be a member state, a consulate, or if you are already in the EU, the authority that deals with immigrants. At EU level, we establish rules and we try to ensure that they are applied by member states. Thank you so much for the discussion.
Thank you. Since we also have, from DG Employment, Patricia De Grey, although in fact there was no specific question, but if she, after listening to whatever has been discussed so far, if she has anything to add into this from DG Employment.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, hi. No, I found this a very interesting discussion. I mean, quite obviously, as my colleague Alexandra has said, the situation in the EU is quite fluid at the moment because of the COVID crisis. And I think obviously the focus here also has a lot been on ICT work. One of the jobs where in fact where all of the places where there is an increase in jobs is in ICT. So in that case, India is very well placed because obviously a lot of people are now working from home, a lot of schools as well. So there is quite a big demand on that. So in that sense, we will have to see, because there is also, unemployment has gone up. We're expecting the GDP as well to go down between 6 and 7% this year. So a lot will depend on all the implications we will have, what will be in the end. Unfortunately, this is we don't know. We see no date, no end sign, but hopefully things will start picking up very soon. But here in DG Employment, we are also very happy to help you. Thank you very much for inviting us. It was a very interesting discussion, and we are also there. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. Gagan, last, any thoughts?
No, thank you very much for having me. I think most of this has been covered, but I think these last comments from Alexandra were extremely encouraging and interesting to suggest that India possibly can try the route out with having an SSA or totalization with Brussels as an EU. So that's very interesting. And I guess we'll leave it at that and let my colleagues share their views. Thank you.
Thank you, Gagan. Sonu? Are you there? Sonu, are you?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. I think I'll continue on that point only, that if we can get EU and India to sign a comprehensive social security agreement, that'll pave a way for great sort of connect and build this whole migration story much better if we have an India-EU level social security agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonu. So, in fact, what we have. I think we covered within limited time. We covered quite a lot of issues, and this is not it's a relatively complicated issues, and particularly when we're talking about 27 countries, EU, different member states, and all the Brexit happening and the kind of economic situation. One thing, in fact, which was interesting, I think, in the discussion that. Which I think Alexandra pointed out, that even before Brexit, actually there were two different systems. So within EU, it may not really affect too much, but at the same time, after Brexit, if we have certain liberalization within UK, and so there might be certain new opportunities, as Professor Cortes has mentioned, for Indian, particularly high-skilled, labor or students and other kind of mobility. And the another point is also about, in fact, in some, directly or indirectly about geopolitics. Now, I think it's also becoming clear that when one is dealing with the EU institutions, maybe perhaps the geopolitics may not really play directly there. But when one is dealing with the member states, then you might have certain kind, because here this is an area where we are dealing with both member states and also with the EU. So as you said, the EU can provide elaborate, kind of, framework rules, and then the implementation happens at the member state level. So many of the things can happen in that case at the member state level. So now, of course, because of the situation of COVID is developing, it's still unstable situation, uncertain situation. But one thing is clear that as a result of this particular crisis, the importance of ICT sector, IT sector has definitely improved. Uh, so whether now physically this will help, as Gagan has mentioned, or perhaps most of the people will become more comfortable find ways of doing things actually sitting, wherever they are. So might be a different kind of engagement perhaps is going to happen. And anyway, as Gagan has mentioned that within the IT sector they are not really looking for migration. So me always, in fact, I think the point you made was very important, because for me the high skilled labor, which is always is kind of more attractive to many European countries, and this is what people talk more. They are not really looking for any kind of migration because they are highly mobile anyway. So they don't stick into one place. They stay to one place, to two place, to three place. They come back again. Their families are here. So where, in fact, we should be working more. Is there any possibility for relatively, less high skilled? And there are also, in fact, we found that a lot of countries now that those kind of migration is also happening. In fact, look at Poland, the kind of short-term kind of work permits they have issued. One of the highest perhaps within the EU in the last couple of years. But of course, most of them have been issued to Ukrainians and others. But there are areas, the new areas opening, and we have a large number of people, those who are not really in that high skill category, but perhaps slightly lower in that category. How our programs, our education policies, how we can really train them for certain kind of migration, that also would be, I think, equally useful. So I think we have covered quite a lot, and I think learned a lot. Maybe now it's up to Mr. Abagani Ramu. He can just have a closing remarks and some word of thanks to our speakers. Joint Secretary, Mr. Ramu.
I think we'll wait for while he tries to connect. 1 minute.
No problem.
Sir, are you able to connect?
Yeah, I'm able to see all of you and hear you.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, so before going for concluding remarks, let me answer the question on diaspora, which was addressed to Secretary. Basically, diaspora issues, Ministry of External Affairs handles in a very wide and wide spectrum of aspects. But in this case, particularly the wide diaspora is not very active in European Union countries. If you see the migration in the last few decades and maybe in centuries, so it happened into other parts of the world. And basically, the high-skilled workers movement was particularly in the English-speaking countries like UK, USA. So, considering that the migration of India in case of high-skilled workers and other skilled workers also, relatively it is a new emerging area, European countries. So that could be one of the reasons. But considering it is growing, particularly the students are going, and then maybe after 5 years, 10 years, they may be settling there, they may be working there, they will contribute in a bigger number to the Indian diaspora there. But nevertheless, the connect and engagement of India with the diaspora in Europe is also becoming more and more, and especially our missions are proactive in engaging with them. And at the ministry level, we have a general engagement in form of caring them when there is an emergency, where there is a problem, troubleshooting, etc. But also we connect them, particularly the older generation, people who spent 1 or 2 generations, so to show India, new India, and connect them to their roots. So that is the way we connect them, and not NRIs and first generation PIOs. But at the same time, we also celebrate the success of diaspora, their contributions to those destination countries by honoring them. You know that a very popular event called Pravasi Bharatiya Divas Convention, where we bring them and celebrate them. And of course, there are some diaspora reach the stage where not only contributing to the destination countries, but also can contribute to the origin country, that is India. So these are the four ways we are engaging with diaspora. And other point about the social security agreements, yes, this is a new area. The more number of people are going out, and there is a more pressure on our missions to have such social security agreement from the professionals working there, so that their benefits, social security benefits can be transferred back to India. So this is a new area, but we have a one exclusively dealing with this social security agreement, and they are going. I don't have the exact number, but increasingly becoming more. These are the two questions I want to answer. But before concluding, let me acknowledge and express my sincere gratitude to all the speakers today, particularly the moderator, Mr. Gulshan Sachdeva, and the speaker, Jonathan Cortes, Alexandra Carvalho, and her colleague Patricia de Grey, and Mr. Glenn Agarwal, whom I am giving the very valid and very useful for us to also keep in mind while making new initiatives, making policies. So with this, to add to one, hearing from all of you very valuable information, but let me conclude in three broad points. Specific. One point is that the European Union is an emerging area, and the migration of India is diversing from the Christian area where they are going to English-speaking countries, but now they are moving to non-English-speaking countries also. That's one recent trend, and it has been proved that entrants contributed to development of destination country and also the origin country. For example, I just mentioned that it has been education in India, but they are heading the very great multinational companies of US. And it is not just one side, but India also has been the beneficiary of immigration. For example, the industry of India, biggest industry of India is Tata, and whose family migrated 400 years ago. So now it is one of the biggest industries. So it is always migration has been useful for both destination and origin countries. Talking in particularly with the European Union, our interests are converging, and we have like-minded thinking, and also we are democracies, and we have tremendous areas of cooperation. One of the areas, important areas, is migration issues. Migration issue, we have a sufficient platform as of now. One is that we have a Indian-European Common Agreement on Migration and Mobility. It basically reduces the situation in making policies for emerging areas of migration. And at the same time, bilaterally, we are engaging with different European countries by way of migration and mobility agreements. They are increasing. So that will definitely make a good platform to take off. I think in maybe next 5 to 10 years, we will see different situation of diaspora in these countries, and the platform is there, so it is time to take off. And there is no limit, not even the sky is the limit. This cooperation between India and Europe is of migration. So with these few words, I want to once again thank and congratulate everyone for the great contribution to this dialogue. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, sir. Before we close, I will just request everyone to kindly turn on their cameras so we could take a group snap virtually.